all, they knowledge, gaining knowledge, but let's do some fun activities as well. So whoever is watching, it would be great. Like, tell me where are you from, or what time zone you are, and then we can start the session. Right. So let's start our today's session. It is on block or manage blocks of your app using state management technique called block. So what exactly is block? First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Abhishek Doshi. I am a Google developer expert for Dart and Flutter. I am a Google mentor as well. I am a organizer of Flutter Valsad. It is a local Flutter community. I am also co-organizer of Flutter India and a senior software engineer at BKNC Technology. And during the work time, I solve bugs. After the work time, I write articles on Medium, so you can check that out as well. So first of all, table of contents. What are we going to, what are we going to take into consideration today? If you are completely beginner, I have your content as well. If you are intermediate, I have your content as well. So first of all, what is state? Then we would see what is state management, why we need state management, what is block, that are main point of the talk, and there are some terminologies related to block. So we would see that as well. And if time permits, we can do live coding, or I have the example. So what I will do, I will take that example and explain how it works. So starting quickly, what is state? If anyone in the audience wants to answer this, they are free to answer. I'm open to all the comments. Like, Flutter is open source, and people teaching Flutter should also be open to everything. So that's what I feel. So even though you don't know what is state, even though you don't know technical terms for state, it's okay. It's totally okay. You can tell the non-technical as well. So what exactly state is? State, we can consider it as an object that holds the properties of the widget, and it can be manipulated during the entire life cycle of the widget. So in short form, it is just an object which holds the properties of the widget. Now, which all properties? These are not the height, width, or that properties. These are basically the Flutter framework properties that are holding. Right. So we saw what is state. Now, role of state. So what exactly is the role of state and how is it useful? First is we get to access the information about widget. The state is the information that can be read synchronously when the widget is built. Now here synchronous is the main, the focus of the point, that we can synchronously check, we can synchronously get the information of this widget when it is being built, and it holds the properties of the widget, as I told earlier as well. So that is the first, and you can see the main usefulness of state. Second is it can rebuild UI whenever we need. So basically, let's say after when the user is in your app, in your application, and after 5 minutes you want to rebuild your UI, so you can do that using state. So that's the reason we call set state. Set state, what basically set state does, it rebuilds your UI, and under the hood, state object does that part. So it just calls the build method again, and your UI would be rebuilt. And the last point is gives control over life cycle. So as I mentioned, that state can be manipulated in entire life cycle of the widget, and that's the reason we get the control of the entire life cycle of the widget. So we can manipulate the widget life cycle, we can utilize it properly, And that's a warning. If you don't utilize it properly, it can have adverse effects on your app. Like you can have memory leaks, you can have nullable issues, and many such things. So there are adverse effects in you know if state is not managed properly. So we saw what is state, why is it useful. So what exactly is state management? No technical terms. Managing state is state management actually. And I haven't added anything here because that's what actually I was going to say. That the technique that you used to manage the state of your application can be considered as state management. Now, it's not required always to use state management. Let's say if you are creating a small application, then state management is not required. State management is never compulsory. And which state management to use, that's also not compulsory. You can use any of them depending on your suitability, on your requirement. So why state management then? We saw what is state, what is state, usefulness of state, and we also saw that it can have adverse effects, right? So that's the main thing. That's the reason we want to have, or we need, state management. So if data changes or new data is being added, then and only then the request to the server will be sent, if state management is integrated. And the second point would be state management helps to centralize and make the maintenance of code very easy, and also improves the quality of code by reducing the code size and making it more readable as well. And one more point is, let's suppose you have page 1 and page 5. There are 5 pages in your application. So let's say you want to pass data from page 1 to page 2. That's pretty easy. You can do that using navigation. But let's say you want to pass data from page 1 to page 5. You can't do that using navigation, right? You can't be passing right from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 to page 4, page 5. That's not the right approach. So that's where state management comes into existence. Another approach is using a global variable or a static class, static object. That's also not a good approach. So that's where state management is required to give access to your data in your entire widget tree, or you can say in your entire application on any page at any time. So what is BLoC then? So you might have heard that there are many state management techniques. Simplest is set state. What we do using set state can also be considered as state management. The main task of state management is to rebuild your UI whenever we need. Set state also does that. So you can say set state is the simplest state management technique. The second is inherited widget. Now, inherited widget is directly provided by Flutter team inside the Flutter SDK. Inherited widget is something that it allows the access of your data to the entire application. It provides data from parent to each child of the application, from the root to all the leaf nodes. And there are many packages like Provider, BLoC, Redux, Riverpod, GetX, Freezed. Many such packages are available for state management, right? So you would think like, which is the best package then, or which one should use? So basically, all the packages which is made for state management depends on the concept of inherited widget. So you can say all the packages of state management uses only one thing as the root, that is inherited widget. So what exactly is BLoC? BLoC stands for business logic components. That's the full form of BLoC. And BLoC basically uses the concept of inherited widget. As I said, all the state management packages would be using inherited widget. Now we can also implement BLoC using stream and sync, but we already have a package, Flutter underscore BLoC, which is a wrapper of stream and sync. Now, if you try to implement BLoC completely by yourself, it is possible. I'm not saying it is not possible, but when you try to do it, you would find that there is a lot of code you need to do. You need to manage stream, you need to maintain the sync. If you forget to close the stream and sync, there would be memory leak issues, and there can be many adverse effects if you don't do it properly. So that's the reason we have Flutter underscore BLoC. Flutter BLoC is created by Felix Angelo. Is really good in Flutter, I can say that, and he has created this BLoC package. So some terminologies. First is let's just first name it. So we would be covering event, state, BLoC provider, BLoC builder, BLoC listener, and BLoC consumer. First of all, what is an event? So let's suppose I won't be doing this technically because BLoC is, you can say, a bit of complex topic, and I would suggest you to first learn by yourself, like learn the way you understand it, not needed to be technical. You can learn it non-technically as well. Like, let's say that a event is basically a function or a something that you send from UI part to your logic part, or you can say UI part to your processing part. State is something that your logic part or the processing part will send back to UI, right? And in short, BLoC is a pipe. I learned it this way. BLoC is a pipe. So on from one end, we pass the event. The BLoC processes that event, gets some data or processes the data, and then sends the state back to the UI part. So I guess this is the simplest way one can understand BLoC. That is just a pipe where where event is being passed, data is processed, and state is being returned back. So event and state is kind of similar things. If you pass something from UI to function, it is an event. If you pass something from function to UI or logic to UI, it is state. So if let's take an example of login functionality. Okay, so login functionality, every functionality will have an event. So let's say if a user is doing email login using email, so there would be a email login event. If he is doing Google sign in, then we can have a Google sign in event. And on the other hand, states would be something that your application would be going through when that event is processed. For example, we have loading state. Whenever we have API calls, we show a loader, right? So let continuing with the same example. So once user or once the user is clicked on submit button, so there would be a loading state first of all. Then we do the processing, or we log in the user, and then we have success state or failure state, right? So this would be your states. Login loading state, you can name it, login success state, and login failure state. So this is event and state. These are, you can say, the basics of BLoC. Next is BLoC provider. Now BLoC provider is something that would provide the instance of BLoC to your application. So if you already know provider, so there is the provider widget that will wrap around material app to give the instance of provider to the entire app. Same way, we have BLoC provider. We provide the instance of BLoC to the entire app. Next is BLoC builder. Now, what BLoC builder is? Let's say for a particular state, let's suppose that we have the success state, and in that state, you want to rebuild your UI. You want to maybe show some more text fields. So in that case, there would be BLoC builder. So in other words, you can say that whenever you want to change your whenever you want to change your UI depending on the state, then you will have to use BLoC builder. And let's say you don't want to refresh your UI, but you want to just show a snack bar, or navigate to another page, or maybe uh, show a toast where there is no UI rebuild, then you can use BLoC listener. So basically this would listen to your state change, and it would show the respected snack bar or anything that you want. And the last is BLoC consumer. Basically when you need both of them, you also want to update your UI, you also want to show a snack bar, then you can use BLoC consumer. BLoC consumer is the combination of BLoC builder and BLoC listener. So whenever you wrap your widget with BLoC consumer, it will have both the builder property and the listener property. So I guess enough of talk. Let's do some real stuff. We still have some time. So I already have one demo code which I created in today itself. Like I had one event in morning, so I created that in morning itself, right? So let me just show you how this BLoC works exactly. Right. So first of all, you will need to add Flutter underscore BLoC. So we have already added that Flutter underscore BLoC as the package. The next step would be to the next step would be to create your BLoC files. So there would be three files, one for event, one for state, and the third, which would be your main BLoC file, or you can say the logic file, where all the processing would be done. So first let's see the event. So what I have done here is I have created a an abstract class, just an abstract class, counter event. And there are three events: initial counter event, increment counter, and decrement counter. Initial counter would just initialize my counter to 0. Increment counter would increment the value of current counter to the new value. Decrement would decrement the counter. So you can say both the event class are almost similar, like the body is exactly similar, right? But we have two functionalities, increment and decrement. That's the reason we have two events. Next, let's move to state class. So here we don't have multiple states, because here there won't be any failure or success. It would just increment or decrement the value and send back the data. So I just created one class called counter data state, where it takes the new value of the counter. So I hope till here it's clear. I have just created few classes, and it takes the value of the counter. Now let's see the main part, that is the counter BLoC. So counter BLoC is just a normal class which extends the BLoC, and BLoC internally would extend equatable widget, equatable package. So what it does is we just have our simple standard constructor. It calls the super and initializes it to 0. Now whenever there is an initial counter event, or you can say on initial counter event, emit the state with value 0. In other words, whenever the user sends initial counter event, return the counter data state with value 0. So emit can be considered as something you throw. So your function or your BLoC would throw the counter data state to your UI with value 0. Similarly, on increment counter event, so if the user sends an increment counter event, send the or throw back the data state with incremented value. So let's say that you want to access the value of counter which the event has, right, from the UI. So you can access it like this, event dot counter. And in the same way, we have added decrement counter event, that if the user sends a decrement counter event, throw counter data state with decremented value. Now let's see how we have implemented the block with our UI part. So first is we wrap our block provider material app with block provider. Now why to wrap material app with block provider? So if you want your entire application to have the block instance, then we wrap it directly on the material app. Now let's say if you just want for a particular class, then whenever you navigate to that particular class where we specify the name of that particular class, like inside the material page route, right? So there you can wrap block provider as well. So that would create a new instance. So we just wrap the block material app with block provider, and we give the instance like which block will be available throughout the application. So here we just have one block. So we have counter block and it will be provided throughout the application. Then let's move to our home page. So what I have done here is I first created an object of the block and initialized it, or you can say provided that particular block to our object. That's the first step. You need to do this in init state and then add the initial counter event so that it can initialize the value to 0. Now this is not compulsory because even a super will initialize it to 0, and whenever we initialize our object, at that time super will be called. So this is not a compulsion. Now whenever you want to add an event, so we have here two buttons, increment button, decrement button. So what we do is the object that we created dot add and then add the increment counter event. So you can say we call that function. Here we have a class, right? Increment counter event is a class. But in other words, just to understand, we can say that we are calling the increment counter event function. Same way here, I have called or added the decrement counter event. Now, whenever you want to rebuild your UI, right? Because whenever the data would come back to the UI, you will need to rebuild your UI. So you just have to wrap your text part, text widget with block builder. And you can specify like if state is counter data state, then return text. The way we access the counter event from counter value from event, the same way we can access the counter value from state using state.counter. So we just access the state.counter value and display it in our text widget. And what I have done here is I have also assigned the value of state.counter to local variable. Now you can see in the entire application there is no set state, right? So you can actually rebuild your UI without using set state with state management. So now let's just run this. Like, is it working or I just coded it randomly? So let's just run it. Yeah. So until it is running, do you have any questions related to BLoC, related to Flutter, related to career in Flutter, anything? So yeah, here it is running. I hope you can see it now. So we just have two buttons, plus and minus, increment and decrement, and a center value with 0. So I'm just incrementing it and it is rebuilding my UI. It is showing the new value. So yes, my code is working and decrement is also working. So yeah, the thing is working now. And you can see that we just implemented our basic counter application with BLoC, and that was pretty easy, right? There wasn't much of code or much of complex things. So yeah, I guess, do you have any questions? Feel free to ask. I hope you learned at least something new. So there is one question. How easy is to build Flutter apps based on Bluetooth devices? I exactly didn't understood this question. Like, what sort of Bluetooth devices? Like, do you mean watch, like Apple Watch kind of thing, or something different? So let's first consider you want to build your app for fitness bands, or you can say Apple Watch or smartwatches. So yeah, it is possible your the same code, the code that you write for Android iOS, that can be deployed on your Apple Watch as well. And now, if you are asking for custom Bluetooth devices, like let's suppose that you have a hardware Raspberry Pi and you want to connect to your application, or you want to deploy your Flutter application on Raspberry Pi, that is also possible. The same code would work because now Flutter has the embedded function, embedded platform support as well. For example, Toyota is using Flutter for hardware. So basically, they are the dashboard apps that we have in cars, right? So they are using Flutter for that particular apps. So yeah, it is possible to deploy your Flutter apps on Bluetooth devices without any issue. The same code would work. If you have any other questions related to Flutter, or how to contribute in community, or how to write blogs, how to start your career in Flutter, feel free to ask. I am open for any type of questions, of course, related to Flutter or career in general. And if you don't want to ask in public, that's also okay. Feel free to connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, on everywhere. The username is same, Abhishek Doshi 26. And I also write blogs, so you can read them as well. In the blogs as well, what I do is, the way I understand a concept non-technically, I write them, and along with that I write technicalities, so that you, as a beginner, if you're a beginner, you can also learn in the same way. The way I explained right today, that BLoC is a pipe. So I have written articles on BLoC, and I have used the same concept, that BLoC is a pipe, and the same way you can use it as well. Yeah, I'm open to any questions if you have. And yeah, I guess organizers have already sent the feedback form to receive the participation certificate and to win a Google Home Mini. Don't forget to fill it. Don't this is a great chance to win something, right? All the events that we have in communities, a great chance to win things and to build the network. So feel free to connect with me on the links provided, on the usernames provided. Thank you everyone for joining. I would just send this PPT link in the chat itself.